A woman saved 2 babies in a sandstorm. The Navajo tribe returned to honor her as a mother. The desert stretched endlessly under a pale sky, quiet and wide, as if it had been holding its breath for centuries. Dry wind moved slowly across the sand, lifting tiny grains that shimmered in the sunlight. Far from busy towns and crowded roads, a small settlement rested at the edge of this vast land. Life there was simple. People woke early, worked hard, and relied on each other when times were difficult. Among them lived a woman named Elena. She was not famous or wealthy. She owned a modest home made from weathered wood and stone, standing alone near the desert path that travelers sometimes used. Most days her routine was predictable. She woke before sunrise, brewed warm tea, and watched the horizon as the world slowly turned golden. She enjoyed silence, but it was not loneliness. The desert felt like a companion to her, strong, patient, and honest. Neighbors described her as kind, but reserved. She helped when someone needed it, whether it meant fixing a broken fence, sharing food, or offering a listening ear. She rarely spoke about her past, and few people asked. What mattered was who she was in the present, calm, dependable, and quietly brave in ways that were easy to overlook. That afternoon began like any other. The sun was bright and the air felt warm, though something in the wind seemed restless. Elena noticed the change while she hung blankets outside to dry. The sky, once clear, slowly turned hazy in the distance. A thin wall of dust appeared along the horizon, faint at first but growing darker with each passing minute. She paused, narrowing her eyes. The desert had taught her to read signs others might ignore. The wind shifted suddenly, pushing against her clothes with unusual force. Birds that usually circled lazily overhead disappeared, seeking shelter. Even the air carried a heavy feeling, like a warning whispered too softly for most to hear. Inside her home, she turned on an old radio. The signal crackled before a voice confirmed what she already suspected. A strong sandstorm was moving quickly across the region, stronger than expected. Travelers were advised to find shelter immediately. Elena sighed quietly. Sandstorms were not uncommon, but sudden ones could be dangerous, especially for those caught far from safety. She secured her windows, tied down loose objects, and prepared to wait it out. As she worked, the wind grew louder, rattling the walls and filling the air with fine dust. The sky dimmed, turning orange and gray. Visibility dropped quickly, and the world outside blurred into moving shadows. Just as she finished closing the last window, she heard something faint beneath the howl of the storm. At first she thought it was only the wind, but then she heard it again, a sound that did not belong to the desert. It was small and fragile, almost lost in the chaos. She stood still, listening carefully. Her heart beat faster as the sound returned. It was a cry. Elena hesitated. Going outside during a storm like this was dangerous. Even experienced desert travelers avoided it whenever possible. The wind could disorient anyone, and breathing became difficult once the sand thickened in the air. She stepped toward the door, then stopped. Common sense told her to stay inside and remain safe. But the sound came again, faint and desperate.
Her thoughts raced. Someone could be in trouble.
Maybe a lost traveler or an animal caught alone. Or maybe she was imagining things. The cry came again, clearer this time. Without allowing herself more time to doubt, she grabbed a thick scarf, protective goggles, and a heavy coat. She wrapped the scarf tightly around her face, leaving only her eyes visible. Before opening the door, she took a deep breath, steadying herself. The wind slammed against the door as soon as she opened it, forcing her to lean forward to keep balance. Sand stung her skin like tiny needles. The world beyond her home had transformed into a moving wall of dust. Shapes were barely visible even a few steps away. She moved slowly, guided by memory more than sight. The cry seemed to come from the direction of the old desert path. Step by step, she followed the faint sound, holding one arm in front of her face for protection. The wind roared in her ears, making it difficult to hear anything clearly. For a moment, she lost the direction entirely. Panic flickered inside her, but she forced herself to stay calm. She listened again. There it was, a soft, broken cry carried by the wind. She moved toward it. Minutes felt like hours as she pushed through the storm. Her boots sank into shifting sand, and breathing became harder with every step. The cry grew louder, guiding her forward until she finally saw something dark against the swirling dust. It was a vehicle, partially stuck in the sand. One of its doors hung open, swinging wildly in the wind. No adults were visible nearby. Her heart raced. She approached carefully and heard the crying more clearly now. Near the vehicle, two small bundles lay wrapped in blankets, pressed against each other as if seeking warmth. The babies' faces were red from the cold wind, their cries weak but desperate. For a second, she froze, shocked by the sight. Then instinct took over. She knelt beside them, checking quickly to make sure they were breathing. Relief flooded her when she felt their small movements. "You're okay," she whispered softly, though they could not understand her words. The storm intensified, and she knew she could not stay there long. She wrapped one baby against her chest and lifted the other carefully into her arms. They were lighter than she expected, fragile and trusting. Standing up against the wind felt nearly impossible. The sand pushed against her with relentless force, threatening to knock her off balance. She tightened her grip, shielding their faces from the storm with her coat. Turning back toward home, she realized the hardest part had just begun. The path she had followed was gone, erased by shifting sand. All she had now were instincts, memories of the land, and the responsibility she carried in her arms. Step by step, she began the journey back into the storm. The wind pushed against her with a strength that felt almost alive. Each step forward felt heavier than the last, as if the desert itself was trying to slow her down. Elena held the two babies close to her chest, wrapping her coat around them to block as much sand as possible. Their small bodies trembled slightly, and their cries were softer now, almost swallowed by the roaring storm. She knew she could not stop for long. The cold wind and blowing sand made it dangerous to stay still. Her eyes burned behind the goggles, and every breath felt thick and dry, but she forced herself to focus on one thing: moving forward. The landscape had disappeared. The familiar rocks, small bushes, and uneven paths that she knew so well were hidden beneath waves of dust. It felt like walking through an endless gray wall. She tried to remember the direction she had come from, counting her steps and adjusting whenever the wind pushed her sideways. One of the babies made a weak sound, and she paused just long enough to adjust the blanket. "Stay with me," she murmured gently, her voice barely louder than the wind. Talking helped her stay calm, even if the children could not understand her words. Her arms began to ache, but she did not loosen her hold. She shifted her weight carefully, protecting their heads from the flying sand. Every few seconds she checked their breathing, feeling for the rise and fall of their tiny chests. The storm grew louder, turning the world into chaos. Sand swirled around her legs, sometimes reaching her knees. She lowered her head and pushed forward, step by step, refusing to give in to fear. Time felt strange in the storm. Minutes stretched endlessly, and she lost track of how long she had been walking. Doubt tried to creep into her mind. What if she was moving in the wrong direction? What if she could not find her way back? She stopped briefly and turned her body so the wind hit her back instead of her face. Closing her eyes for a moment, she remembered the position of her home compared to the old desert path. The wind direction gave her a clue. She adjusted slightly and continued. Her boots slipped on loose sand, and once she nearly fell. She tightened her grip quickly, protecting the babies before anything else. Her heart pounded hard in her chest, but she regained her balance and kept going. Suddenly, she noticed a faint shadow ahead, a low rock formation barely visible through the dust. Relief filled her. She recognized it. It was a natural landmark not far from her home. She moved toward it with renewed energy, feeling hope push her forward. When she reached the rocks, she leaned against them for a moment, allowing herself a few seconds of rest. The babies were quiet now, their breathing shallow but steady. She adjusted their blankets again, making sure they were shielded from the cold wind. The storm showed no sign of stopping. She knew she had to find a safer place quickly. Even if she reached home, the journey might still take too long. Then she remembered a small shelter nearby, an old structure used by travelers during bad weather. It was simple but strong enough to block the wind. Turning slightly to the left, she moved again. Guided by memory and instinct, her legs felt heavy, and exhaustion began to creep into her muscles, but she refused to slow down. Every step mattered. As she walked, she spoke softly to the babies, telling them stories about the desert, about the sun that would return after the storm, about warm light and safe places. The words were meant for herself as much as for them, a way to keep fear from taking over. After what felt like forever, she saw it, the small shelter emerging from the storm like a hidden secret. It was nothing more than a low building made of stone and wood, but to her it looked like salvation. She hurried toward it, pushing the door open with her shoulder. The wind rushed inside briefly before she managed to close it behind her. Suddenly, everything became quiet compared to the chaos outside. She sank to her knees, breathing heavily, her hands shaking slightly from exhaustion. For a moment she simply listened to the babies breathing, making sure they were safe. Inside the shelter, the air was still and calm. Dust floated slowly in the dim light, but the walls blocked most of the storm's force. She carefully laid the babies down on a blanket and checked them again, brushing sand gently from their faces. One of them stirred, opening tiny eyes before settling again. Relief washed over her. She removed her scarf and took a deep breath, feeling her lungs finally relax. The storm continued to roar outside, shaking the walls, but inside the shelter there was peace. She searched the small room and found a container with emergency supplies left by travelers, extra blankets, a small lantern, and a bottle of water. She used the water carefully, moistening a cloth to clean the babies' faces and help them feel more comfortable. As time passed, exhaustion settled into her body. Her hands trembled slightly and her shoulders ached from carrying them through the storm, but she stayed alert, listening for any change in their breathing or movement. Outside, the wind slowly began to change. The loud roar softened slightly, though the storm was still strong. She knew rescue teams might be searching, but she had no way to contact anyone from here. She wrapped herself around the babies, creating a protective circle with her body. The warmth of their small forms against her chest filled her with a quiet determination. Hours passed slowly. She watched the door, listening for any sign that the storm was weakening. The babies slept peacefully now, their faces calm despite everything they had been through. As she sat there, she thought about how quickly life could change. One moment she had been inside her home, preparing for an ordinary afternoon. The next, she was sitting in a storm shelter with 2 lives depending on her. She did not think of herself as a hero. She only felt responsible. Eventually, faint sounds reached her ears, distant voices carried by the wind. At first she thought she imagined them, but then she heard them again, clearer this time. Hope rose inside her. She stood slowly, careful not to disturb the babies, and moved toward the door. Opening it slightly, she saw shapes moving through the fading storm, rescue workers searching the area. She waved and called out, her voice hoarse but strong. The figures turned toward her and relief flooded their faces as they approached. The storm had not completely ended, but safety was finally within reach. The storm slowly faded into the distance, leaving behind a quiet desert covered with fresh layers of sand. The sky began to clear, and pale sunlight returned, soft and gentle after the chaos. Elena stood outside the shelter with the 2 babies wrapped securely in blankets while rescue workers approached. Their faces showed relief and surprise when they saw her holding the children safely. One of the rescuers hurried forward, speaking calmly and asking if she was hurt. Elena shook her head. She felt tired, her body heavy from the long struggle, but her attention remained on the babies. She carefully handed them over only after making sure the rescuers supported their heads properly. The rescue team quickly checked the children and confirmed they were safe. The moment brought a wave of quiet emotion that Elena did not expect. She had focused so much on survival that she had not allowed herself to think about what would happen after. Soon, more vehicles arrived. Among them were anxious family members who had been searching desperately since the storm began. Their faces carried worry that slowly turned into relief when they saw the babies alive and unharmed. A woman ran forward first, tears already falling before she reached them. She gently took one of the babies into her arms, holding the child close, as if she would never let go again. Another family member followed, carefully lifting the second baby. Their voices filled the air with soft words of comfort and gratitude. Elena stepped back quietly, unsure of what to say. She felt like an outsider watching a deeply personal moment. For her, saving the babies had felt like something she simply had to do. She had not thought about recognition or attention. One of the elders approached her slowly. His presence felt calm and steady, and his eyes carried warmth and respect. He spoke softly, thanking her for protecting the children during the storm. Though his words were simple, they carried deep meaning. Elena nodded gently, feeling slightly uncomfortable with the praise. She explained that anyone in her position would have done the same. The elder listened carefully and smiled, as if he understood her humility. The families belonged to a Navajo community traveling through the region. They had been caught off guard by the sudden storm when their vehicle became stuck. While seeking help, the babies had been left protected inside the car, but the rising danger forced a quick evacuation, and confusion separated everyone before they could return. As the group prepared to leave, one of the mothers turned back toward Elena and took her hands. Her eyes were filled with gratitude beyond words. She thanked Elena again and again, her voice soft but full of emotion. Elena felt warmth spread through her chest. She was not used to such intense expressions of thanks, but she understood their meaning. Later that day, she returned home. The desert looked different now, reshaped by the storm. Sand covered familiar paths, and broken branches lay scattered across the ground. She opened her door and stepped inside, greeted by silence. For the first time since the storm began, she allowed herself to sit down and rest. Her muscles ached, and her hands still felt cold, despite the warm air returning outside. She closed her eyes briefly, replaying the events in her mind. The cries in the wind, the moment she found the babies, the long walk through the storm. Life slowly returned to normal over the next few days. Neighbors visited to check on her, bringing food and sharing stories about how the rescue had spread through nearby communities. Some called her brave, others called her strong, but she continued to brush off the praise. Then, one afternoon, a small group arrived at her home. They were members of the same Navajo families whose children she had saved. They brought simple gifts, handmade items and food prepared with care. Their visit was quiet and respectful, not overwhelming. They sat together outside under the soft evening light. Conversations moved slowly, filled with smiles and pauses that felt comfortable rather than awkward. Even though they came from different backgrounds, there was an easy understanding between them. One of the elders spoke about how actions can create bonds that go beyond words. He explained that in their tradition, saving a life created a connection similar to family. Elena listened carefully, feeling both honored and humbled by the idea. The babies were brought to her again, now calm and smiling. Seeing them safe and happy filled her with unexpected emotion. She held one gently, noticing how peaceful the child seemed compared to the frightened cries she had heard during the storm. Over time, more visits followed. They were never loud or dramatic. Instead, they felt natural, like a friendship slowly growing stronger. Stories were shared about their journeys, their traditions, and their connection to the land. Elena began to understand that the desert held different meanings for different people, yet it connected them all in some way. One evening, the elder spoke about a ceremony they wished to hold. He explained that they wanted to honor her formally, recognizing her courage and compassion. Elena immediately felt unsure. She insisted that she did not deserve such attention. But the elder gently told her that accepting honor was not about pride. It was about allowing others to express gratitude and maintain balance within their traditions. She promised to think about it that night. She sat outside watching the stars appear one by one. The desert felt calm again, as if the storm had never existed. Yet inside her, something had changed. She realized that her decision to step into the storm had not only saved lives but had also created a connection she never expected. Days later, she agreed to attend the gathering, though she still felt nervous about standing in front of others. As she prepared for the journey, she reflected on how quickly ordinary moments could become meaningful stories. She had not planned to become part of anyone's history, yet now she felt tied to something larger than herself. The desert wind moved gently around her, carrying a sense of quiet purpose, and for the first time she allowed herself to accept that maybe her actions had truly mattered more than she realized. The morning of the gathering arrived quietly, with soft light spreading across the desert hills. Elena stood outside her home, looking toward the horizon as she prepared to leave. The air felt calm, very different from the violent storm that had changed everything days before. She adjusted her simple clothing, unsure if she was dressed properly for what awaited her. She had never attended a ceremony like this before. The idea of being honored made her uncomfortable. She believed she had only followed her heart during a difficult moment, nothing more. Yet the elder's words stayed in her mind. Accepting gratitude was part of respecting others. A vehicle arrived to take her to the gathering place. The drive was quiet, giving her time to think. As they moved deeper into the desert, she noticed how the land seemed alive with history. Rock formations stood like silent guardians, and the wind moved gently across the sand, carrying warmth instead of danger. When they reached the location, Elena saw a group already waiting. People stood together in small circles talking softly. Some wore traditional clothing, while others dressed simply. There was no loud celebration, only a calm and respectful atmosphere. She stepped out slowly, feeling many eyes turned toward her. Instead of pressure, she felt kindness in their gazes. A woman approached first, smiling warmly, and welcomed her with gentle words. Others followed, greeting her as if she had always belonged there. Elena felt both honored and shy. She tried to stay quiet, unsure how to respond to so much attention. The elder who had visited her home earlier walked toward her and guided her to a place near the center of the gathering. The ceremony began with silence. Everyone stood still for a moment, listening to the wind and the sounds of nature around them. Elena felt a deep calm settle inside her as the quiet wrapped around the group. One of the elders spoke first, telling the story of the storm. His voice was steady and respectful, describing how danger had come quickly and how 2 small lives had been placed at risk. He spoke about the moment a woman chose to walk into the storm instead of turning away. Elena lowered her eyes, feeling both humbled and emotional. Hearing her actions described from another perspective made them feel larger than she remembered. Another elder spoke about the meaning of courage. He explained that courage was not only about strength but about compassion, about choosing to protect others even when fear is present. He described how, in their tradition, someone who protects children in times of danger carries the spirit of a mother, regardless of blood or background. The words touched Elena deeply. She had never thought of herself in such a way. The families whose babies she had saved stepped forward. The mothers held their children, now calm and smiling, and thanked her again. Their voices were soft but full of emotion. They spoke about the fear they felt during the storm and the relief they experienced when they learned someone had protected their children. One of the mothers placed a small handmade item into Elena's hands. It was simple but meaningful, created with care and intention. Elena felt tears form in her eyes as she accepted it. Music began softly in the background, gentle rhythms that felt connected to the earth itself. People moved slowly, creating a peaceful atmosphere rather than a dramatic performance. The ceremony felt less like an event and more like a shared moment of understanding. Elena listened as stories were shared, not only about her actions, but about others who had shown kindness in difficult times. The focus was not only on her, but on the idea that compassion connects people across cultures and experiences. At one point, the elder invited her to speak. She hesitated, feeling nervous. Standing before the group, she struggled to find the right words. Finally, she spoke simply. She said she had only followed the sound of the babies because she could not ignore it. She explained that anyone with a caring heart would have done the same. Her voice was quiet, but her honesty touched those listening. The elder nodded gently, acknowledging her humility. He explained that true bravery often comes from people who do not seek recognition. As the ceremony continued, Elena felt something shift inside her. The nervousness faded, replaced by a sense of belonging. She realized that the gathering was not about placing her above others, but about honoring the connection created through her actions.
Children ran nearby, laughing and playing.
The baby she had saved rested peacefully in their mother's arms, safe and surrounded by love. Seeing them happy filled her with quiet joy. Food was shared later, and conversations became more relaxed. People told stories about their lives, their journeys, and the lessons they had learned from the land. Elena listened carefully, learning about traditions and perspectives she had never known before. The elder sat beside her and spoke softly. He explained that honoring someone as a mother in their culture was not about replacing family, but about recognizing the spirit of protection and care. He told her that she would always be welcome among them. Elena felt deeply moved. She had lived much of her life quietly, never expecting to become part of something meaningful beyond her small world. Now she felt connected to a wider circle of people who valued her not for achievements, but for her heart. As the sun began to set, warm golden light covered the gathering. The ceremony ended not with applause, but with shared silence, a moment of gratitude that felt powerful without needing words. Before leaving, many people came to say goodbye. Some hugged her gently, others simply smiled and nodded with respect. The babies' families promised to visit again, expressing their hope that the bond created would continue. During the drive home, Elena watched the desert pass by slowly. She felt peaceful, but thoughtful. The ceremony had changed how she saw herself. She still believed she had only done what was right, yet she now understood that small choices could carry deep meaning for others. When she arrived home, the sky was filled with stars. She stepped outside and looked up, remembering the moment she first heard the babies crying through the storm. That moment had changed everything. She held the handmade gift carefully, feeling the weight of gratitude and connection it represented. For the first time, she allowed herself to fully accept the honor given to her, not as praise, but as a reminder of the power of kindness. The desert wind moved softly around her, calm and gentle, as if acknowledging the journey she had taken. Life slowly returned to its quiet rhythm after the ceremony. But Elena felt different inside. The desert looked the same as always: wide skies, warm sunlight, and long, silent evenings. Yet she carried a new sense of connection that had not existed before. She moved through her daily routines with calm focus, but memories of the storm and the gathering stayed close to her thoughts. Each morning she stepped outside to watch the sunrise, just as she always had. The light spreading across the sand felt warmer now, filled with meaning. Sometimes she found herself remembering the moment she first heard the babies crying in the wind. She realized that one small decision had changed many lives, including her own. Days passed, then weeks. One afternoon, a familiar vehicle approached her home. She recognized it immediately and felt a quiet smile form on her face. The Navajo families had returned, bringing the children with them. The babies were stronger now, curious, and full of energy. Their laughter filled the air, breaking the silence of the desert with warmth and life. Elena watched them carefully, amazed by how quickly they had grown. It felt difficult to believe that these happy children were the same fragile lives she had carried through the storm. The families greeted her warmly, as if visiting a close relative rather than someone they had known only for a short time. They brought food to share and simple gifts made with care. The visit felt natural and easy, without pressure or expectation. They sat together outside talking about everyday things: the weather, travels, and stories from their lives. Elena listened more than she spoke, but she felt deeply comfortable in their presence. The connection between them had grown quietly, turning gratitude into friendship. One of the mothers told her how the children slept peacefully now, no longer frightened by loud winds or sudden sounds. She said they often seemed calm when hearing Elena's name, as if they remembered the safety she had given them. Elena felt emotion rise in her chest but stayed quiet, accepting the words with gentle humility. As time went on, the visits became more frequent. Sometimes the family stopped by during their journeys, staying only a short while. Other times they remained longer, sharing meals and stories under the open sky. Elena began to look forward to these moments, realizing that her once solitary life now included people who truly cared about her. Neighbors noticed the change as well. They saw her smile more often and speak with greater warmth. The desert no longer felt like a place of isolation, but a space filled with connections she had never expected. One evening, as the sun set in deep shades of orange and gold, Elena walked with one of the elders along a quiet path near her home. The elder spoke about how actions create ripples that continue far beyond the moment they happen. He said that kindness given without expectation often returns in ways people never imagine.
Elena thought about his words long after he left.
She realized that before the storm, her life had been peaceful but small. Now it felt wider, touched by stories and relationships that gave it new depth. Seasons changed slowly. The heat of summer softened into cooler evenings, and the desert showed its quiet beauty through subtle shifts in color and light. The children continued to grow, and each visit brought new moments of laughter and discovery. One day the families invited her to attend another gathering, this time not to honor her but simply to celebrate together. She accepted without hesitation, feeling less nervous than before. She no longer saw herself as an outsider, but as someone welcomed with open hearts. At the gathering, she watched the children play freely among others, their joy spreading easily. She felt proud not in a way that brought attention to herself, but in a quiet way that came from knowing she had helped protect life during a moment of danger. Later, sitting beside a fire under the stars, she listened to stories about ancestors and lessons learned from nature. The elder spoke again about the role of a mother, explaining that it was not defined only by birth, but by the act of protecting and guiding others. Elena listened silently, feeling the truth of his words settle gently within her. When she returned home that night, she stood outside for a long time watching the stars. The desert felt peaceful, and she felt at peace within herself. Years began to pass, and the story of the storm became part of local memory. People occasionally mentioned it, but Elena never sought attention for what she had done. She continued living simply, helping others when she could, and enjoying the quiet beauty of her surroundings. The children grew older and stronger, and their visits became filled with new conversations and shared experiences. They called her by a special name given during the ceremony, a name that symbolized care and protection. Each time she heard it, she felt a warm sense of belonging. One evening as she watched the sunset, she thought about how life often changes without warning. She realized that true meaning comes from small choices made in moments when no one is watching. Choices guided by compassion rather than fear. The wind moved softly around her, carrying the scent of the desert. It felt different from the storm that had once filled the sky with chaos. This wind felt gentle, almost like a reminder that even the harshest moments can lead to something beautiful. Elena understood now that she had not only saved 2 lives but had also gained a family she never expected. The connection formed during the storm continued to grow, proving that kindness has the power to bring people together across cultures and experiences. As darkness settled and stars filled the sky, she felt grateful, not for recognition or honor, but for the simple truth that one act of courage had turned into a lifelong bond. The desert remained vast and silent, but for Elena, it was no longer empty. It was filled with memories, laughter, and the quiet knowledge that ordinary people can create extraordinary stories simply by choosing compassion when it matters most.